So for me, growing up, I decided from a very early age that I wanted to be in the Red Cross. I liked the idea of helping people. So I joined up at 6. And actually from 5, I'd wanted to be a surgeon. I actually had a little nurse and surgeon's kit to try and bore my neighbours with, really. But I'd always had a heart for other people. I ran a little school in my Wendy house in the garden. So I think that had always been of my heart. And actually, even from those early days, I think it made me realise I could help people. I went to convent school, and the values of the nuns were always about compassion and paying for missions in Africa, baptisms and such the like. And we gave our pocket money to overseas aid work. And I think that was probably a value in me from a young age. Most of my career was in corporate life, the first 12 years or so as well, working in Barclays or British Gas, Marks and Spencers, and then latterly in the city. And I did most of those in a human resource job in HR management in personnel. And I'd done exams to support that. What was interesting was that by the time I got to my early 30s, I'd done that, and I'd also set up my own business because I didn't really like the values in the city that seemed to be more about partners becoming richer and more. I wanted to care more for the employees, which was always going to be a conflict in a city environment. I went to work in my own business. I set up my own firm of consultancy and not-for-profit coaching and counselling and therapy, and did that for about another 10 years. And it was during that time I started a psychology doctorate and actually went to volunteer in an aid charity called MedAir, which was a Christian relief and development charity. I started with them in their head office in Switzerland and went out to Kosovo, and then latterly went to Kenya, North and South Sudan, Northern Uganda, and over to West Darfur. And that's how I got into aid work as an HR person in London, giving up my day job eventually and working in an aid context. Female genital mutilation has been around for about 2,000 years. It predates Islam and Christianity and was probably started in either Egypt or Sudan. It has no place in any religious text, although it was sometimes done in the name of Judaism and is currently done in the name of Islam and Christianity in various different countries. It was also practiced in the West, in America and the UK, up until about the 1950s in very extreme examples and incidences. It has affected over 200 million girls who are living with the effects of FGM. That's probably one girl every 5 seconds who is still cut and has FGM, female genital mutilation, any one time. Every 5 seconds someone is cut. It happens in a wide band of area from as far west as Senegal and Gambia to as far east as Somalia, as far north as Egypt, and as far south as the Central African Republic or Democratic Republic of Congo. Female genital mutilation has many short, medium, and long-term impacts on a girl's health. It can happen to somebody from age a few months old, even a few days old at some time, up to the day of the wedding, and sometimes even older. But it's often done at around 5 years old. A cluster of people groups cut their girls at around that age, another cluster at around puberty, somewhere between 10 and 14. It has many profound impacts. At the time, of course, there's extreme pain and trauma. There can be damage to tissue. It can go wrong, and then the girl can get sepsis or bleed to death. It can also affect urinating, and girls in Africa who are cut in a rural setting can often miss up to 25% of their education by spending that time in a latrine because their urine leaks out in single drips rather than as most of us would urinate. It also has impact on sexual relationships, where the girl is often cut and sewn up, not always, but often, and it can lead to something called vaginismus, which is pain and trauma on trying to have intercourse. This in turn can lead to more physical trauma to the area, and also it can affect sexual relationships with a husband and often lead to divorce or unfaithfulness. It can also lead for the girl as she grows up to having flashbacks for the moment she had the FGM, and can lead to depression, anxiety, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There are many other consequences as well, including urinary tract infections, UTIs, which can last for life, and also people have problems with having a baby as well. And there is a Somali saying that says there are 3 traumas in a girl's life, 3 tears in a girl's life, really. The day of circumcision, the day of marriage, and the day of having a baby, because all of those affect the woman's life, where she could die at any one of those occasions. It happens in all the diaspora countries, such as the UK, Australia, Europe, Middle East. It happens over in Malaysia and other countries. It happens in one group of the Indian group called the Bora people. So it's quite extensive. It happens at least in 28 countries in Africa, which is the name of the charity I set up to stop this in Africa, but it goes much wider, and our work covers right up into the borders of anywhere from where people come and still practice. As a Christian, I was working in aid work for a few years and had been working in different aid war zones and places of natural disaster. I happened to be working in West Darfur, where there had been a lot of conflict over the years. And one day I met a little girl who had had FGM at 5 and had been raped at 10. She was left abandoned by everyone in her family and community. They were all killed after the Janjaweed, the armed militia, came through her village and burned it to the ground. We found her at 7 months pregnant and gave her a safe delivery. As I met this little girl afterwards, holding her baby as she was going to be repatriated to a long, very distant second cousin in the other side of Sudan, I literally cried out to God, saying, who's going to look after girls like this? What will happen? Because I was going home that next week. Why is this happening? How can this happen? And in answer to the first question, who will look after these girls, I heard God's audible voice, you will. I couldn't really believe I had heard the voice of God, but I was on my own in the middle of nowhere. And I instantly felt that was what I was meant to do. I went back home to my home church, and I was due to go back to West Darfur, but I'd broken my foot and stayed at home for a little while. And then the insurgents escalated, so I stayed at home for a little while. I talked to my church, who weren't terribly happy about the idea of me going back to help eradicate FGM globally because of the danger to myself, really. They already know I'd worked in war zones and had been in life-threatening situations on a number of occasions. I felt that as a call from God, I couldn't ignore it. I'm a bit like Jonah, really. If you try and run away, God gets you in the end anyway. So I might as well go graciously in the first place. So my church was very unsure about me going and doing anything like this. So we came to an understanding where I would retrain over the next 7 years, getting experience, setting up my charity behind the scenes if necessary. And I would be ready to go, and psychologically and physically and knowledge-wise in a good place by the time they agreed for me to go. In this time, I restudied basic midwifery and had the great privilege of undertaking 10 births, 4 in Nigeria and 6 in Pakistan, where I learned basic midwifery, and I learned basic fistula surgery in northern Nigeria. These were invaluable, along with studying Islamics and gender development and anthropology at college, in order to prepare myself for the conversations I would have with imams, the Pope, First Ladies, and other key ministers in our UK government and overseas. With a calling like this behind me, I really couldn't say no. And actually, my Christian faith was being fulfilled. Actually, there's not a day goes by I don't lean on that faith, and it has been there to save my life on a number of occasions when I've been literally alone in the middle of nowhere in a very dangerous position, and God has protected me, surrounded me with angels, and I've come back to tell the tale. As a Christian, I find that I don't judge other people groups who do these practices, as I know why they do it. And many of the people have a faith themselves, either Christian or Muslim or African religion. It's only understanding the culture of what drives these practices that you can stay in a non-judgmental seat. After all, who am I to judge my fellow? I do lean on my faith and regular church attendance, the prayer of many around the world, and having spiritual practices where I observe a Benedictine lifestyle help me process the darker parts of my work and not get over traumatized myself, at which point I'd be no use to anybody else. To start with, I didn't want to set up a charity, and I actually nested under another charity called Restored, who took me under their wing, and I reported to their board in the early stages of setting up my own charity as a daughter organisation. After a few years, it became clear it was important to set up 28 Too Many as well, and we became a little bit more robust, had more than our first founding 3 directors and myself. We had a number of team members and consultants, staff members, and it seemed time to cut that tie, at least the umbilical cord, though I still have very close relationships with the founders and current leaders of Restored. I set up 28 Too Many initially with myself as a working person who is supported only by gifts to CMS to allow me to do this mission, which is sometimes given by churches, sometimes by individuals. However, I saw it was needed to have an entity that looked and was under the Charity Commission and therefore trustworthy to receive donations. My first donation came from New Wine Women. I went to talk at a conference, and as I went to talk a little bit about my aid work and the story about a girl I'd met who'd had FGM at 5 and was raped at 10, I heard 900 women inhale their breath in horror at what I was saying. I couldn't see the audience because I was caught in the spotlights, but I realised that these women were horrified and wanted to do something. They allowed me, unusually, to send round 4 buckets, and my friends helped make that happen. And those 900 women gave £9,000. My friends told me afterwards one lady gave her bus fare home. Another lady gave every penny she'd got in her purse. She just tipped it into the bucket. Those women enabled me to start my charity. I didn't have a bank account at that point, and I said, New Wine, please hold on to that cheque, that money, until I've set it up. But we got on with a bank account and trustees, and the rest is history. 28 Too Many has now been going as a registered charity for nearly 10 years, and I've been running the project since 2010. People often ask me how you set up a charity and how easy it is. Actually, it's quite difficult running a charity. I have run big projects in corporate life, I've run my own business, yet running a charity is the most difficult thing I've ever done. It's difficult for many reasons. Firstly, income. We fundraise and we need about £100,000 a year to run our charity. I also have to fundraise for my own support, which is about £30,000 a year. That takes quite a lot of effort and requires long-term relationships with people who become friends and lifelong supporters of enabling this practice to end. Another thing is personnel. As a small charity, we often attract people on lower wages and on a consultant contract because we never know when the next money is going to come from. That is fine to start with, but clearly they want to move on to other things in the future, and we recruit for other people to get the benefits of their experience in later life, and that, like many organisations. We often attract young people who want to get internships or experience with us, and older people who've already had their career and want to do something to give back at the end of stages of their life. And both are very helpful to us. The other thing is our projects run across 28 countries and the diaspora, which is where FGM happens, with people coming from a place and carrying on in the place they've now settled. That makes logistics quite difficult because we didn't really want to set up 28 Too Many, the charity I run in each of those 28 countries. It wasn't our aim to set up projects on the ground. That's what other people do in their native context, much better than I could ever do. What our aim was to do was to provide research. And in the 10 years having set up 28 Too Many, we have achieved our aim of making a 10% reduction in FGM in 10 countries in 10 years. We've produced over 50 research reports, which are used by anyone from the UN to community organisations or faith-based organisations in context, and so much more. One of the successes was that we won the Global Advertiser of the Year award a few years ago. And that's an extraordinary thing to do when we're a small charity based out of the UK ending FGM. I was unable to go to New York and receive the award, so one of our trustees went, who's a Somali FGM survivor, Hoda Ali, and she went to New York, and I did a launch in London at the same time, and that was just extraordinary and just probably something I'll never forget in my career, highlight of my life, I think, really. We also made a partnership with Trust Law, the pro bono arm of the law profession. They gave us lawyers, and we set about doing 28 reports in all the different country reports we've done already on the law and FGM. And then we did another project after that called Model Law, and that alone has helped change the law in Somalia and Sudan. Bearing in mind, I met the little girl I first met in Sudan. Now, as this woman I met was 10 when I left her, she'd be 25 now. Her daughter would be 15, and her granddaughter could be 5. And actually, for the first time in those 3 generations, her granddaughter is safe from FGM because of what we've done and implemented through our reports. I do feel I've been protected. I've had more than my 9 lives of God's protection, angel protection in working in these areas. And one of the protections was when I got visited by somebody in my room in one of the countries I worked in. And actually, it could have ended very differently. I did survive the story, not without a lot of shakiness. I think one of the things that I've pressed into has been my faith that's got me through these really difficult challenges. Some days I would literally open my eyes in the morning to do my morning devotions and go, well, I'm still alive. One less day that I have to worry about. Yesterday's worries have gone. Let's see what happens today. This same philosophy of using my faith to lean on was particularly important when I got diagnosed with late stage cancer about 6 years ago. I was due to see my GP. I was due to see my GP, and I went to ask him about a very small, tiny, pea-sized lymph node in my groin. Wasn't particularly bothered about it, but within a week of working overseas in Africa on a short trip, it had grown to a much bigger lozenge. It looked a bit like I had a hernia operation, got a hernia. I went to my doctor, and she immediately said, "Oh, this is serious." So I went off to see a consultant within a couple of weeks, and he did say what we might be dealing with is lymphoma, but I didn't really understand what that was or know what it was and didn't Google it. I actually had a trip to Africa booked for 10 days' time, and I talked to the consultant. He was away on holiday that next week. So I said I really didn't want to cancel this trip, because if it was nothing, then I'd have wasted all this money, at least a couple of £1,000 for airfare, myself and a companion to travel in 3 different countries and to promote our reports in Senegal, Mali and Gambia. I didn't really want to do that, and it also gave me something to distract me from thinking about my health. So I negotiated with a consultant. He agreed. I had all the tests he wanted the following week, and then went off to Africa. And actually, the trip went well. I'm not sure I'd do the same decision now, knowing what I know about the risk I took, but I got away with it. All was okay. The work was done. The projects were launched. And again, through my faith, it's what endured me through the 36 cycles of chemo I had to have in the next 3 years, which did knock the stuffing out of me. But I've carried on working throughout in various different jobs, and I live to tell the tale. I think through this period, emotionally, I have changed my philosophies on life. Both my parents died when I was in my 20s, and I have no siblings. So I did feel, oh no, not again. I've got cancer this time. I've also seen a lot of my friends die of cancer. I've just lost my 7th friend to cancer, and that really upsets me because I do think, when me? Yet I'm a positive person. I think my days are numbered by God, and if it's not my time to go, then it won't happen. And I feel in good health at the moment, and I enjoy every day as best I can, with my challenges that have been left as a footprint of both having chemotherapy and then a compromised immune system and COVID. These things can be overcome, and I find that people are very helpful, and I've managed to be humbled and have to get around all sorts of different things, like walking with a wheelchair or losing my sight and having to walk with a white stick. And once they've been done once, they're actually not nearly as bad as they appear. I've been studying mindfulness this last year and a 10-step program on pioneering. And also I have my 3 offices of the day, which are like spiritual practices, which help me regulate myself as well. And I also am much better at my own self-care now, making sure I take a full Sabbath and some good downtime and have good support around me in terms of friends and Christians I can lean on. When I first started working in FGM work in 2005, hardly anybody had even heard the term. I looked around for a couple of years, working in Africa and also looking in the UK at organisations like Viva Networks to see who else had made an impact. Clubfoot International I also looked at as well. I went out to visit Church Mission Society Africa to see what they were doing as well, who I could work with. I wanted to make sure that I made a difference and contributed something rather than just replicating something already was happening or doing something that people didn't want. What I noticed, being a strategist from running my own business, I guess, and being on the board of various charities, was that there was no quality research being provided to the sector. I thought, if I can provide the research, then the project people in country can do a far better job of helping end FGM through programmatic work than I could ever do as a white woman from London. So that was the idea. We started in Kenya and then moved across to Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia in the early days. And those were the first 4 reports in the first year or so. I've also talked a couple of times at the United Nations at the Commission on the Status of Women in 2012, and then virtually this year I spoke again in 2021. These things all make a difference. I went to Rome and talked to the Pope about ending FGM and actually appear in Vatican magazine. And I've talked to First Lady of Burkina Faso and various other overseas dignitaries and brought people over when David Cameron had his first FGM summit in London. These have all been achievements, none of them without cost, that have actually convinced me that the FGM sector is a better place now than when I started. We now have mandatory reporting for health practitioners, schools and social workers. We have FGM dedicated clinics in the UK. We have a psychotherapy practice set up by Layla Hussein to help survivors process their PTSD and trauma. We know that passports can be kept by and confiscated by the police when a girl is at risk of being taken over abroad in the long summer holidays at risk of FGM. We know that families can be kept in the UK when, again, they look like they're taking girls for having FGM overseas. And there is protection for girls of what's called extraterritorial protection, where if an FGM act is practiced overseas on a British citizen, they still have rights to protection in the UK. All of this gives me great hope. We have achieved our 10-year goal, a 10% reduction in FGM in 10 countries, and so very much more. All sorts of things can be gifted to help our work. And actually, we're ready to expand our work now. And it's even more critical now that we have funds to do this important work, because more and more people are having, although FGM stats are going down in many countries, in some countries like Somalia, it's flatlined, and it's 99. It's actually gone up from 99 to 99.2% in this last year. So it's a very large proportion of that country that needs to be assisted. Even in Kenya, where I worked for a while and visited in the middle of Laikipia, in the middle of Plateau, the FGM stats for main part of Kenya are 25% of the population. In the Maasai, it's 75%, and with the Somalis, it's 99%. So there is much to be done around the world. So we would really encourage people to get involved, to write to your MPs, to take school packs to give at local schools, those of you who work as social workers or teachers, to make sure it's on the curriculum from year 10 upwards, to integrate it into social work or church safeguarding processes, to volunteer with us, to share our research reports around the world, to come and volunteer with us in our office, or to come and help with our board. There are so many jobs to be done in research as well. Many of our volunteers help with research as well. We help many students doing masters and PhDs to do their research, but also they help us with our reports. So we thank each and every one of them now. There are so many ways to get involved. Just let us know how you can help us. Look on our website and get in touch. I think we all have to get involved in these things that we know that Jesus in his time got involved in. The woman who bled, the woman at the well, the woman with the jar of nard. These were people that were on the margins, people that were the other side of the lake, effectively, somewhere else, somebody somewhere on the edge of society. And yet those are the people that I've always been attracted to. Not because I do it from a place of privilege, yet from my heart's desire, from my God's calling me to actually make the world better and to love these people as my brothers and sisters and to help end these practices. I would really encourage you to look in the Bible and see how we are commended to work on injustice. It's written in so many parts of the Bible. In fact, one of my favourite parts of the Bible is in Isaiah, where it talks about being the repairer of broken walls. That story inspires me to help break down barriers, towers of patriarchy and societal blocks on equality, and to go where I am needed despite the personal risks.